welcome to another episode of USASBE's Meet the Editors. This series is devoted to connecting entrepreneurship researchers with a variety of journal editors to gain insights on how to get published within those journals. Connecting entrepreneurship educators with collaborators and co-conspirators, pedagogical influencers, and program innovators is at the core of USASBE's value. Join us as we continue to boldly advance entrepreneurship education and create better research, better teaching, and better impact on students and communities. Look at all USASBE member benefits at usasbe.org. But today's series is free to the world, so I'd like to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Muldoon, who's the co-editor of the Journal of Management History. Joining Dr. Muldoon is Dr. Eric Liguori, who'll be talking about an exciting special issue with the Journal of Management History on entrepreneurship. The Journal of Management History, or JMH, is an interdisciplinary journal publishing rigorous, high-quality research using diverse methodologies and theoretical approaches. JMH welcomes papers on entrepreneurship, and Dr. Liguori is going to speak about a special issue on the history of entrepreneurship with the Journal of Management History.
Journal of Management History is an emerald journal, and we cover and research basically the domain of that idea of management and history. So we are basically, to summarize it, we publish papers that look at things from the standpoint of time. It doesn't have to be 300 years ago. It doesn't even have to be 30 years ago. 3 years ago would be sufficient, but it looks at something from a broader context. What's going on? How is this impacting current practice? What aspect of former practice or theory led to this? Generally speaking, we look to find papers that are very empirical, that do have some sort of theory, and generally speaking, advance the field from a disciplinary standpoint, in that we're looking for things that test theory, develop theory, explain theory. And that's basically the bedrock of our journal. We're a well-regarded journal. We are a B right now on the Australian Business Dean's list. And our site score is going up as time permits. We have an exciting new movement going on, in that we're in the process of advertising the journal. We're trying to expand upon what the journal does, trying to get some new ideas and papers going forward. And it's I think a pretty exciting time since I've come on as editor. My current co-editor is Brad Bowden. Him and I work together really well, and I think we're pushing the journals to some good places. In particular, we wanted to talk about this idea of our special issue on entrepreneurship, thought, and behavior. And it's reflecting back and pushing forward. The submission window started August 15th. It lasted December 1st. And the editorial team is myself, my good friend and co-author, Dr. Eric Liguori of Rowan, and Dr. Raj Mato of the University of New Mexico. Now, we want to talk a little bit about the special issue, but that doesn't mean that we do not accept or that we do not want papers on entrepreneurship. We look forward to entrepreneurship papers. So here's a list of some of the potential topic things. This is non-exhaustive. Basically, all it has to do is address something, an entrepreneurship idea, using history, that idea of time, and have some sort of relevance to current thought. But these could include the evolution of entrepreneurial thought and behavior over the time, historical case analyses that has a theoretical approach to it, the role and development of ecosystems, the emergence of research streams within entrepreneurship, the idea of a concept within entrepreneurship, doing a historically minded literature review, how the construct of entrepreneurial intention came into being might be an idea. The idea of the proliferation and research of the spread of entrepreneurship into education over time. So there's lots of issues here that we are very interested in allowing or desiring for this. It doesn't need to be traditional entrepreneurship. It could be social entrepreneurship. It could be scientific entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship related to the arts. And, so we're looking for this general idea here of researching on the idea of entrepreneurship from a historical lens. So our special issue specifics, these are the kind of things the papers have to have. It has to be relevant, and it has to inform the future of entrepreneurship, research, and practice. What do I mean by that? If you publish a paper or write a paper on, say, someone like John Baptiste Say, who was a very person who lived hundreds of years ago, you have to ask the question, what does Say have to say? Well, that's bad. What did Say write that has an influence on current research and practice? And he clearly still does, because there's a path dependence there, but you have to tease that idea out a little bit. They also have to explore topics that are historically interesting, but also capable of having a contemporary impact and meaningfulness. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, for example, if you publish a paper, say, on African-American entrepreneurs and their history, and say it's published during the time period, say that your case study is a time period from the Jim Crow era. Well, I would say for the paper to be really accepted and published, you have to address some of the current issues regarding Black Lives Matter. And that's not very difficult thing to do. You would discuss it in your conclusion and build up your argument there. They have to have some sort of they cannot be just purely retrospective. They have to have some sort of implication for the future, okay? Because while it would be interesting trivia, unless history has that implication for the future, unless there's something that we could learn from it, then it becomes a piece of trivia, and we're not looking forward to that. However, the editors, myself included, will be willing to help you build upon that if you have questions. Now, someone asked me a question, I will field this. University entrepreneurship. Very good question. Do we look at things that include university entrepreneurship? Absolutely. University is a major driver of entrepreneurship. Scott Shane has written about that extensively, and we would be excited to see it. Okay? So it could be even institutional entrepreneurship or government entrepreneurship, but it has to have some sort of undertaking that's unique in some way. And these are, of course, very generic ideas right now, but it's a very wide open concept. Okay, Eric.
So thanks, Jeff. I think one of the most exciting things that has sort of evolved at USASBE over the last 5 or 6 years is this continued effort to partner with journals, and to partner with journals that really connect in with USASBE's mission of advancing entrepreneurship education. And so I wanted to just take a minute and talk a little bit about why I think that the Journal of Management History is actually a great partner for an organization like USASBE that's looking at advancing entrepreneurship education. And I think that, on the one hand, pure research sometimes doesn't always translate. I think translation is something that's very helpful here and is very well suited to this type of research and the type of work that gets published in management history. And so I put 3 examples here. And the first is one I know, fairly well. But this is one that, Bobby Muldoon, first author, he was an undergraduate math major who took on putting this paper together as a summer project. And so now we're talking about interdisciplinary student engaged research. He had an interest in tennis. And we dove into Lemelson Center archives and started looking at all of the different ways that Howard Head in skiing and in tennis was influenced as he developed and launched, a series of, still to this day, iconic products. And so from this standpoint, it's not only informing, how we teach students, but it's also the kind of paper, if I was teaching a product development course, or when we look at, corporate commercialization, that would talk about where ideas come from, how ideas sort of evolve over time. It's the kind of thing that I could use in my classroom. The next would be some work by Simone, Phipps, and Leon Prado, and I'm a huge fan of all of the things they're doing to better inform how we teach the history of business, and to be more representative of the influences that have been there throughout a period of time, and looking at social entrepreneurship and injustice in particular. So again, it's the kind of paper that I could use if I was teaching a principles of management class, but also the kind of paper I could use in a social entrepreneurship class. It's the kind of content that's going to influence the narrative and the cadence of how we structure and put together our courses, and how we structure and put together what content goes into our textbooks. And then really, it's kind of the same thing, right? So when you shift to this last paper by Murphy et al., they're looking at sort of how the evolution of entrepreneurial thought has evolved. And again, it really helps me when I read stuff like this contextualize the field. And so now if I take a step back and I think about USASBE as an organization that aims to advance entrepreneurship education through both teaching, scholarship, and practice, I see how some of the practice component comes in here, right? It's the bedrock of most of this work. But that teaching and scholarship piece, it really blends together for me when I look at management history research and what JMH publishes in that regard, more so than some other journals. And so I thought when Jeff was talking about the goals for JMH and kind of the exciting future, and the great impact increase that they're starting to experience in downloads and site scores and Scopus, that it might be a really interesting partner. And so we brought this to USASBE to say, let's look at merging these communities, and let's look at helping entrepreneurship become a bigger component of this, management history sort of space. Because I do think that despite us finding some good examples to show you, there has been a gap. And whereas entrepreneurship has exploded in, the launch of its own series of journals, and certainly as a dominant sort of research stream within a bunch of other mainstream management journals, it's been kind of neglected in a lot of ways in the history literature. And I think that means there's a huge opportunity there. And so I know that, traditionally we'd probably say, oh, this seems like an interesting or a different journal partner for USASBE. I think it's actually a really great one, and I'm really excited about it, and that these two organizations are sort of coming together to do it. So thank you, Jeff, for making this happen, and Brittany and Julie.
I would just like to talk about some of these papers a little bit greater in depth, just to give you some idea of what we're expecting. We do provide you the link to it, or the citation to it. But I just would like to say, in addition to Eric, not only are our papers great for undergraduates, and many of our papers are very crystal clear. They're not overly complex with the method. They tell stories, the historical method, like other case studies. Our papers do have a theoretical rigor to them. They do advance the theoretical rigor. But there's also a benefit to publishing as well as assigning this to your doc students, because it forces us to look at a concept over a longer period of time. As you know, as constructs age, they change their meaning. For example, LMX, one of the most popular leadership concepts out there, something that was on my dissertation, started out as role theory and advanced slowly through time, and it eventually became a social exchange theory concept. And if you take a look at stuff like this, not only can you write a paper on it, but it could also inform future research. I just wanted to talk about some of these papers that I believe are exemplars of what we're looking at. 3 are entrepreneurial, 1 is not, but it has something that I think might be very interesting. This is the Murphy paper that Eric mentioned, which is a conceptual history of entrepreneurial thought. It's one of our most highly cited and highly downloaded papers. It's a very important article. It has actually appeared and it's been cited in the Academy of Management Review. And it provides a historical overview of centuries of entrepreneurial thought, starting with Cantillon, actually before Cantillon, and moving up to the present. And it's a well-done paper, and it gives a very big picture. But this paper, because the paper can't be everything to everyone, it doesn't really give us kind of the small picture scale. And you could write a paper on papers on any of the number of ideas mentioned in this paper. And that's very fascinating and very well done. Well, this is our paper on technological brokering in action, revolutionizing skiing and tennis industries. It's been a long time since I've read this paper. I did review it yesterday. But what we did was we took archival evidence from Howard Head, and we asked the question, how was he able to come up with his innovative ideas? And traditionally, the great man theory of innovation would suggest that they sprung from his head, basically. I guess that's a pun that I didn't intend, but excuse me. It was something that was basically sprung from his own ideas, his own initiative, and his own effort. But what we argue is that it wasn't necessarily Howard Head's ideas, but his role as exploiting social capital and using the legitimacy he gained from his successful careers to build and refine these new industries. These industries were in existence before then, but he really revolutionized them and really expanded them. And this is a paper that we would like because it has archival stuff, it has a theory, and I think it advances the field if I'm not going to be too praiseworthy. This is a notable paper that really made a serious contribution. I actually had a previous other paper in the slide deck until Eric probably encouraged me to go with this by Phipps and Prado. Leon and Simone, we went to graduate school with at LSU, and they are two very, very important management historians, particularly in management education, and as Eric said, finding the forgotten voice. And they did it here with a very interesting and well-done paper that's very interesting, in that its conclusion is that fairness and justice about perceptions, or the perceptions of fairness and justice, will tell us whether or not something should be commended for social entrepreneurship or whether it's a proponent of social injustice, both on the procedural, distributive, and interactional level. And I thought that was a very interesting paper. It's very nuanced. Some people would say that this is good. People are creating their own pathways. Other people would criticize it, and they do kind of both. They recognize what's good, they recognize what's bad, and they give an explanation for it. And this is something that we like too, because one, it's theoretically developed, and then two, it is taking something that people had not really thought about before previously. This is not something that would have appeared in the journal 10 years ago. It's not something that might have appeared in 5 years ago, but it's where we're kind of moving with things, and it's really well done. These type of micro-social histories are something that we really, really encourage. And the last paper that I would like to reference is our current Best Paper Award by two Italian gentlemen on Hambrick and Mason's upper echelons theory. And this is kind of where I would like to position the journal in some ways, because this is what I call a historically minded literature review. And literature reviews are extraordinarily important for the profession. I think they are the bedrock of the profession because they explain what we think about something. What do we know about something? And the best literature reviews, particularly those published in the Journal of Management, ask the next question, how did we get here? And based on how did we get here, what are the potential avenues which we could go in the future? And as I mentioned, a historically minded literature review, a historically minded paper, advances the field by taking something from the issue of time and giving us this bigger mosaic of concepts. And this is a paper that does it by researching something on upper echelons theory, which is a very highly cited branch of research. It's very, very important. It informs a lot of the modern stuff on corporate governance. And this is the type of paper that I would like to see entrepreneurial concepts for. For example, I mentioned entrepreneurial intentions. We can mention entrepreneurial self-efficacy. We can mention ecosystems. You could write a paper on the idea of ecosystems and how they developed over time from a research standpoint and what challenges there are for doing it, how those challenges were resolved. There are any number of ways. For upper echelons, you could write a paper like similar to with their book that Foss and Klein wrote on the theory of the firm, that it can consider entrepreneurship. You could do something similar with this and then tracing it from a historical standpoint. So these types of things are very interesting and things that we really like. And since we're experts in the field, it doesn't take a lot of effort to take what we know and kind of just take a historical stand on things. This does not necessarily mean, although we like it, that you spend times in a dusty old library or going through a archive. A lot of historians, myself included, do a lot of stuff that looks at published stuff as primary evidence and that we put it within a bigger context. And that is historical. And I think this stuff is really cool because it tells us just what do we need to do in the future in our field. And I think to understand the present and the future, one has to understand the past. So I thank you very much for your time here today. And Eric and I are here to answer any questions.
All right, it looks like Bob has a question, and he's looking for an example of a theoretical lens on an entrepreneurship topic.
You could choose almost any type of theory that you want. You could choose institutional theory. You could choose a motivation theory, such as expectancy. It just has to have something that's accepted as a theory. You can use social exchange. It doesn't really matter. It just has to have something that explains why this happened. That's basically what I mean by a theoretical lens. There has to be some sort of explanation as to why.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost think if you were, and I'm talking without thinking, which is usually entertaining, if nothing else, but I'm almost thinking that there is certainly a plethora of leadership theories that work very well in, business and corporate settings that I would guess don't parallel nearly as well in entrepreneurship context and with trying to look at leadership in entrepreneurship. And so, something that, looked at, the evolution of entrepreneurial leaders and question the core tenets of those particular theories or their predictive validity or, sort of explanatory power might be really interesting. But, you can approach this from so many different perspectives, whether it's, starting with a theory and then saying, all right, well, there's a very well cited paper in management, general management history that looks at the evolution of agency theory. It's like Ben Dixon et al., like 2018 or something. And it really went back to the historical foundations of that theory and said, here are the core tenets. Here's kind of what was put forward. And then it looked at how that theory has been used over time and how the field sort of morphed away from some of the original thought areas. And then it identified areas like social entrepreneurship, I think, that might not be as appropriate for that particular theory. So, I mean, that's one option, but you could also go and look at like that Howard Head paper, some really interesting data, innovation archives, right? All of the founders' notes, sketches, collections, and see, what in there is interesting and, where did the idea come from and how did it evolve? And, what can we learn from sort of that process? It's, I don't know, I guess for me, things like that are just intellectually stimulating and, they sort of fuel that academic curiosity we all have.
Yeah, I'd like to build off on what Eric said. One last thing. It just, for us to be theory, it just has to have an explanation as to why. That's the key aspect of theories. I go with set and install on that. So that's basically what we're looking for. And it's something that we could help you with as you build your manuscript, or if you need any insight, we can definitely explain it for you.